Hi, I'm Leon Goren, president of PEO Leadership, a peer-to-peer leadership advisory firm. We're an amazing community of CEOs, presidents, and senior executives. Ask yourself, are you learning as fast as the world is changing? It's time for Ontario business leaders to band together for counsel and support. It's time for you to tap into the business wisdom of our peer groups and unlock new ways to grow. I want you to come out of this COVID crisis a better leader and your organization ready for what's next. Take the first step at peo-leadership.com. This morning, I'm very excited to welcome Rishad Tobaccowala, the former Chief Strategist and Chief Growth Officer of Publicis Groupe. Now, Publicis Groupe is an advertising and communications firm with over 80,000 employees worldwide. Rishad has built a Hall of Fame career, being recognized by both Time and BusinessWeek as one of the world's top marketing innovators. He has a reputation of an ability to see the future, provide sage advice, and help create multiple disruptive companies. As I prepared for our fireside chat today, I read a number of Rishad's newsletters. They're called The Future Does Not Fit in the Containers of the Past. His new book, Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data, which is absolutely fantastic, and I urge you all to pick up a copy. And I watched him give numerous interviews online. Aside from his recognition as an incredible marketing innovator, I got the feeling that one of his greatest strengths is his ability to always tell people what they need to hear, especially when they don't want to hear it. Anyway, before I begin this session, this is how we envision the hour unfolding. We'll spend about 30 minutes, Rishad and I, covering some ground, talking about both his book and some of the thoughts that he's got in terms of what the future holds for us. I will open it up to Q&A after around 30 minutes. Please put your questions in the group chat, and what we will do is sort of identify you, we'll bring you off mute, and you can ask Rishad the question directly. So let's get started. Good morning, Rishad, and welcome to PEO Leadership. I'm so glad you're able to join with us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone who's listening or watching.
So I thought we'd start it off. You talk about the Great Reinvention. And I thought, what a way to start before we start getting into the micro stuff. We'll start on a macro perspective. And I'd start with, why is this different? And I've heard you talk on interviews about this. Different than the 9/11s, the 2008, 2009. What's happening today in this world that distinguishes and makes us want to think about where we need to go?
So there are three significant differences between all the challenges we have faced anywhere in the world in the last 40 years. The first is this, unlike all the others, is a combination of different crises. So it's not just a health crisis like SARS and MERS was. It's not just a financial crisis like 9/11 was. It's a health crisis, a financial crisis, and a social crisis all together. So that's the first thing. The second is, unlike anything that's happened before, this has happened to everybody in the world. So it's all countries and everyone. Even during the Great Recession, 37 countries had no recession, for instance. And many people, depending on their wealth, escaped it completely. So this is, you might not have as much of a wealth impact, but everybody is vulnerable, including the President of the United States. So that gives you sort of an idea. And the third is, unlike many of the other crises, this one will go on for at least 12 months continuously. So if you basically take people and make them start or stop doing something for 12 months, they change their behaviors. And as a result, I have strongly suggested that anybody who has written a plan, a business plan, a marketing plan that's dated December 2019 or earlier, needs to revisit it with three simple questions. Number one is, how is my customer or consumer changed? Number two is, how have I changed, right? And number three, what category am I really in, and what competition is going to be in the future? So that's why I call it the Great Reinvention.
I know you're meeting with a lot of different CEOs still. You're not really retired, Rishad, is what I'm going to say here, because you're still advising a lot of these CEOs around the world, a lot of these big companies. How are they dealing with it? Do you notice some that are just sitting on the sidelines? What are the great ones doing in terms of sort of adjusting quickly to this?
So there are four factors. Yes, I'm not retired. I'm in career 2.0, which is I'm fortunate that I can be a company of one. So a company of one is I've solved for something which I call everything is easy, but people get in the way, right? Which is I no longer have bosses, clients, or employees. So, but I still work, oddly. But the key, I think, is the first thing that everyone is thinking about that's doing it well, and most of the people are, or many of the people at least I speak to are their number one focus is on employees. Their number one worry is employees, because they're now beginning to realize that after 6 months, their employees are running out of mojo. And I wrote a piece, which is, in this newsletter, which is 6 things to do for the next 6 months. And my whole thing is most of us have the opportunity to do a do-over, because in most countries, the next 6 months are going to be like the past 6 months. And if 6 months ago, you knew what you were going to do, you're going to be working from home, you're going to have all these challenges, you'd probably do things differently if you knew it wasn't a 2 or 3 or 4 week thing, but a 6 month thing. And we're now really in the midst of a 6 months of dramatic challenges. So part of their problem is how do they continue to grow their talent? How do they manage cultures, especially when people are going to be located as individuals? That's number one. Number two is the key word that they're thinking about is flexibility. How do they bring greater flexibility and greater optionality to every part of their business? Like, for instance, supply chains. They've recognized that having supply chains that were the cheapest supply chains aren't necessarily the most strategic thing to do. For instance, Wendy's ran out of meat for hamburgers. Many people in the United States ran out of masks because the supply chain was, let me get the fastest, cheapest supply chain I can, but those can be very fragile. So now people are looking at optionality and resilient supply chains. They're also looking at, do they have to bring all the employees that they may have either furloughed or put on deferment back? Or can they bring some of them back, and what flexibility do they have? Because in effect, the University of Chicago, where I live in Chicago, says 42% in the United States of the furloughed jobs will not come back as full-time jobs. So they want flexibility of supply chains, flexibility and the third thing that they're looking at is how do they reinvent their business, recognizing that distribution will be forever hybrid. That if you're a restaurant, the days of you only being a restaurant without curbside pickup, without delivery, without potentially drive-through are over. The number one rated restaurant in Chicago, which is the number 4th restaurant in the United States, called Alinea, basically does pickup and delivery. And it's a Michelin 3-star restaurant.
That's interesting.
Because they've said this is what the future is. They moved out of their lovely dining room into a patio roof. And so what basically happens is for at least 6 to 12 months, people are going to have to be multi-challenged. 70% of all purchase decisions in the United States now are impacted online. 35% are executed online, but 70% of all decisions. So people are thinking about optionality of distribution, optionality of people, optionality of supply chain. And the most important thing that they're thinking about is, if I were to start my business again today with everything that I know, what would it look like? Because one of the key things to remember is, let's go back to 9/11. Not 9/11, go to 2008, 2009 Great Recession. When the 2008, 2009 Great Recession happened, there were two things happening at the same time. There was a mindset shift because there were a lot of people who were starting to think about, obviously, were financially challenged. They had all kinds of issues. But around then, we entered what I call the second connected age of technology. While the first connected age was about connect to transact and connect to get informed, which is Google and Amazon. The second connected age, which built on the first one, was connect all the time, which is on mobile phones. and connect to everybody, social networks. Those were born around 2007, 2008, around the same time as the Great Recession and the early forms of AI. So what did General Motors and Ford do coming out of the Great Recession? They went back to doing business as usual. What didn't they see? That people's mindsets had changed as well as new technologies had come on. People were sort of asking, do I really need to own things like cars, right? And new technologies had also come on. And they missed the birth of Tesla and Uber. Gillette and Schick went back to adding blades and selling them for more expensive prices. They forgot that YouTube, social media, had allowed companies like Dollar Shave Club to be born, which took away 15 share points. So a lot of them are basically saying, given that we're now entering the third connected age, which is voice, 5G, AI, building on the first two, and a massive new mindset in people's behavior, looking for safety, looking for security, looking for impact in society, what are my new competitive sets? What does my new category look like? Who are my competitors really? And they're spending a lot of time in that because in effect, they realize there is no going back. So one of the things in this Great Reinvention piece that I've written, I basically say, if you use the word new normal, every time you use it or every time someone in your company uses it, give yourself an electric shock. There is no new normal. New normal is for lazy minds. We're entering the new strange, right? And William Gibson basically said, the future is already here, but it's not evenly distributed. Check the way people are living now in Korea. South.
It's interesting you say that though, Rishad, because I was going to come to you on because you talk about this new strange, right? And yes, the new normal. But when you think about new strange, you almost think that is a short period of time. So I need to think about that new normal of where we're going to end up at.
Yeah, but it's going to be permanently but it won't look anything like what it has been in the past. So new normal makes you think that it's going to be somewhat normal, but I don't think business will ever be normal because anytime it's normal, the rate of change is going to be so fast that you'll be surprised at what's going to basically happen. And it isn't going to be like what happens here in the United States. In the United States, 7 days without precedent feels like 7 years, right? So every day seems to be completely different. But you're seeing that if you look at the rate of change of what is happening, right? New normal says there's a steady state. Now I can rest and relax. My stuff is no, that steady state. If it's going to happen, it won't happen for 2-3 years.
Okay. It brings me up to another thing that I picked up in one of your interviews, and I know it's relevant to a lot of people in this room. And I think you mentioned, if you live by Google, you'll die by Google. And I kept thinking about it, and I'm thinking of it in perspective of this world today. And then I think about, it's not just Google. If you live by Amazon, which a lot of our members are starting to live by Amazon because they're taking a bigger and bigger piece of the pie in terms of what we sell, you may die by Amazon. And especially if you're telling us that it is going to continually change and at a speed that we can't, we're going to be racing all the time here.
Yes. So I have spoken often, and I spoke at a travel conference about 8-9 months ago, and there were the CEOs and C-level executives of most of the big hotels, airlines, etc. And my thing was, you all don't realize it, but you all don't have a business increasingly. Your business is owned by Google. In many ways, your business is owned by Google. And that is pretty much of a big shock. So give you an idea, when about 6 months ago, Expedia announced their earnings and their stock price fell by 30-40% and their CEO was replaced by Barry Diller. And the reason was because they began to realize that Google was eating their lunch. So 40% of any time you search for travel on Google, the result that comes back is a Google property. And guess who the biggest advertisers on Google are? Booking.com, Expedia, other travel. So even though your largest customer, you're undermining your largest customer's business. 40% of all searches today on almost anything right? On Google goes back. On Amazon, the recent thing that just found out, they consider everybody who sells on them, you know what their name inside is? Internal competitor. That's what they call us, internal competitors.
Nice. Yeah.
Right? And so the reality of it is, fundamentally, these trillion-dollar businesses can only grow by eating your business. And the three big businesses, so they're gonna just keep growing. And my belief is many of these platforms, they control the data, they control the customer, they control the search. So what do you control? A factory, a store, a restaurant. How do you value that? It's really, really hard. And what you're beginning to see is some companies are refusing because they have built a brand and they found ways to do it, even though they're trying it again, for instance, in luxury products. But the big luxury brands of a Hermes, LMVH, a Chanel will go nowhere near them. Even though in the near term, that's a big problem, but they say we've got to manage our own. A lot of people are beginning to use things like Shopify. You know, Shopify allows you to keep your own data, allows you to keep your own customer. And I think the reality of it is every company must recognize that they cannot live without these platforms. You would go out of business if you didn't work with these platforms, right? But what is your 3-year plan not to basically be owned by these platforms? And not owned like by them acquiring you for a very nice price. It's basically being put out of business by them. And that's a key thing.
Difficult question. Like I get what you're saying, and we battle this on. But how do you compete against these giants? They're already massive today.
You do. So the fundamental path that I believe, and I'm working with a lot of boards, and I will speak in one area which I know a little bit about, which is marketing and advertising. Okay, I might know a little bit about after 4
Just
years,
a little bit, yeah.
I'm not sure, right? So my belief is, look, I think what we need to do is the following. Number one is every company should set aside an hour or two in every board meeting on how they are going to have, what is their plan and what's their updated plan against all the major platforms that they use, or not against, but how do they work with all the major platforms. In many cases, most board level people believed that these platforms were about advertising. They're not. They're about business models. They're not about advertising. They're funded by advertising. Not Amazon, but many of those are funded by advertising, but they're about business model changes. And that's a board level decision. I yell and scream at CMOs saying, why aren't you on the board? Or why aren't you presenting quarterly to your board? Right? This is not something on the side. This is fundamental to the future of your business. Now that has fortunately been zoomed into the future. So every senior executive over the last 6 months working like this have recognized what is going on. So they're paying attention. So number one is there should be a board level discussion, and most board level discussions should basically be built over a 3 to 5 year plan and not the next quarter. Right? So what's your 3 to 5 year plan? And the 3 to 5 year plan requires just 4 factors. The first factor is, what do you do in the near term to maximize flexibility by sometimes putting more money on things that may cost you a little bit more, because in the middle to long run, it'll actually help you. So that is, think about if you think of yourself as a supply chain to a customer, why are you relying only on 1 or 2 supply chains? Why don't you be more resilient on your supply chain? So they're changing their supply chain with regard to their distribution, with where they're getting their products and their raw materials. So I said, you need to do this. So the board basically says, we will take a 15 to 20% increase in cost of reaching people, because in the long run, it's better. It means you can basically reallocate some money from these platforms to others and build others. That's number one. Number two. That's
actually huge. That's actually huge.
Yes.
In terms of taking on that short-term cost.
But if you don't do it, that's why it's a board decision. It's a board. If you don't do it, then you're out of business.
Right.
You're basically out of business as a big company. In 3 to 5 years, you're out of business, because in effect, they own you. My whole basic belief is, remember, you're looking at an industry where most of these people call us users. And we are users who are paying more and more money to our drug peddlers to get us more addicted. Makes no sense. Okay. So I'm not saying don't you will still do 80 to 90% of your business that you're doing this year, next year, but make it 90% and not 120%. And then make it the next year 80%. So that's number one. Number two is use everything you possibly can to develop a first-party relationship with your end customer or consumer. So build first-party data, start, email things, start different things, and build direct relationships. And don't necessarily make these people be the only ways that you get to folks. That's sort of a second. The third is, and I don't know what the situation in Canada is, but in the United States, I'm strongly recommending to the Association of National Advertisers, the 4As, that they need to basically get the massive clout of all their companies to lobby against these people and to lobby for more transparency, potentially to lobby for a breakup of these companies, okay? And while the Fortune 500 companies only account for about 25% of the spending on these major platforms, they happen to have the ability to actually put together lobbying pressure, and they happen to be big brands, which are very important. So you need to have a government policy, a strategic policy, a supply policy, all of these things over the next 3 to 5 years. Any company at a high level that isn't doing this, I basically think it's going to be sued by their shareholders in a few years because the board was missing in action. This is not about advertising. This is business models of the future.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you for those thoughts on that. I'm going to shift it a little bit back to the employees now. And, you have a chapter on which you have two chapters. One, you talk the reality that change sucks, and then really updating your mental state today in terms of addressing it. And so your perspectives on the change sucks, we're all going through this right now, right? And really as leaders, our responsibility is to inspire and engage our people to perform. I mean, we need to think at the board level, absolutely direction where we're going, but our biggest second responsibility is we need to inspire and engage our people. And they're going through a lot of change these days. You had some great helpful hints, and maybe you can share this with the group in terms of how do you actually accomplish this, especially in a world today that I'm dealing with a screen. I'm looking at you through a screen. I'm not with them every day. Some ideas maybe you can share with us on that.
Sure. So a lot of people had asked whether I had written my book for COVID-19.
It's true.
And I said no, because my book came out on January 27th. And it's a physical book by HarperCollins published globally, which means the last time I touched it was July. So I couldn't even figure out even if this thing came up in November or December in Beijing or in Wuhan. So I think the big thing why people found the book interesting is because I was addressing things like how do you manage change, how do you manage teams across screens, and a whole bunch of other things. And it wasn't because of COVID-19, but because I understood where technology and people were going, and I thought we were going to have more and more distributed workspaces, because I was aware of things like Zoom, and I was aware of what's coming down the line, right? And so my stuff is, this is going to happen. I didn't realize it was going to happen much faster. So with that being said, there are 3 quick things I would say. First is starting with change. I truly believe that for most of us, change sucks. And so when anybody tells me change is good, I say, I'm happy, why don't you change? Right? You remember, people always tell you change is good, but they want you to change. So I said, if it's so good, you change, I'm fine. Right? Which is, change is really difficult because when you change, you don't know what you're doing, you make mistakes. People of the caliber, besides me, who are listening in on this, all of you all are, senior executives in companies, whether it's small, medium, or large, or whatever, you're senior executives. And when you are senior, changing is a little bit difficult because you have to learn new skill sets after many years of not learning too many new skill sets. And many of these skill sets have exactly the opposite way of thinking than the way you were trained. And so you start making mistakes and you don't want to do it. So you start putting out all the terms, but you sometimes fake it. I'm not saying you all do it, but I see that happening a lot of times. So change is difficult because you make mistakes. Change takes time, change is learning. But while change is difficult, irrelevance is even worse. And if one doesn't change, one becomes irrelevant. But in order to change, putting out a press release, telling people how change is good, putting it up on your website, and having change agents and a change manifesto is total and complete BS. Nothing works. None of that works. That's basically like putting lipstick on a pig. It's still a goddamn pig. It doesn't work, right? What does work are the following. Number one, please explain to every one of your employees why change is good for them. Not necessarily good for the company only. Why is it good for them? Companies don't change, people change. I don't understand why people don't understand the simple thing. If you want to get better, your people have to get better. If you want to transform, your people have to transform. And I'm not going to transform unless you tell me why it might be good for me, which is number one. Number two is provide me with incentives. In addition to why it's good for me, provide me with incentives. Those incentives don't have to be monetary. They could be a recognition, autonomy, etc. And number three is provide me with training. Like one of the key things I'm keeping really busy on is like every day I'm probably training a whole bunch of people because my stuff is all of you all at home. I'm going to show you how to actually do these things. So people are now investing in training. So training and incentives and communication. That's very important. The other is all of us have to think of ourselves, recognizing it as we're looking across screens, that Zoom meetings are not necessarily bad. They might actually be better than many of the meetings we had at the office. So I have a chapter called Have More Meetings, right? And then I have another chapter which I call Managing the Darker Side of Brighter Screens, which is like how do you deal with screens. I'll sort of distill those into like three key concepts that can be used. The first one is a meeting is when you look at somebody and have a conversation. A meeting is not a gathering in a room looking at screens. Those are called stare-a-thons. We never had meetings. We had stare-a-thons. We would go and we would look at screens, the big screen up there, the laptop there, the little phone that we hid below us. That was what it was. We never had meetings. That's why we hated it. And if we weren't invited to a meeting, we felt bad. And when we went to a meeting, we felt we were wasting our time. So my basic belief is a meeting is when 2 people have a discussion or 10 people have a discussion, and the number of slides or additional material you use should be limited to 3 or less. Because everyone can read the stuff. If you want a 50-page deck, send it to people before. First of all, I don't know why people write 50-page decks, but okay, write a 50-page deck, let people read 50 pages, right? Then say, okay, the key summary of this deck are the following 2 slides. Now let's have a discussion. So the first is Zoom meetings actually are better than many other stupid meetings we had. So don't cry for me meetings, okay? It's fine. So that's number one. Number two is the most important thing in a meeting from a business perspective is the following. A meeting is good if you're generous. People always said, go to meetings where you can take something away. I said, I only go to meetings where I can add value and I can give something away, not take something away. Because if you go to meetings where you give something away, it's going to be a good meeting because A, the other people will think it's really cool. And if you do something good, they'll think you're really cool. So this whole idea of it's I, me, mine for meetings with all these meeting planners and meeting books, right? Total bullshit. They've never worked in business, most of them, for a long time, right? Completely academic. So that's sort of a second one. Let's do that. So generosity, empathy, trying to understand what other people think about. So I would say that every one of your employees are not working from home. They're living at the office. They're not working from home through choice. They're living at the office, right, because of a major disease. And therefore, they are basically feeling fragile, anxious, and uncertain. And recognize that. And in many cases, they're grappling with children at home, not having seen stuff. So empathy becomes a very key thing. And therefore, make sure that in all your meetings, including with each of your direct reports, you try to talk to them for at least 15 minutes, one-on-one, at least once every couple of weeks. You just have a conversation. Try to have conversations versus having meetings. So that's the empathy. And the third one is energy. One of the reasons that I'm getting very involved in a lot of training is after 6 months, a lot of people's mojo has run out and people are not feeling, they have Zoom fatigue, they don't have energy. And so what you want to do is you want to give them some combination of clarity, inspiration, and belief. So clarity is, what do I do? after this particular call or after this particular meeting, right? Belief is, yes, I can do it, right? And these are, and energy is, I feel good about meetings. There's so many meetings where someone walks into a room and collapses the mood of the room, right? And we're having so many meetings where everyone, because of financial and other constraints, think about how many of your meetings are actually just demotivating. It's like every month, every week, you're looking to see where the revenue is and how many people you need to cut or what you need to basically do. At some particular stage, those get like horrid, right? And so how do you make those different? And my book has all different ways of doing it. But what we are forgetting continuously is there's a human being at the other end. It's not goddamn some chatbot that we're talking to.
I love your use of words here, getting to the point. No, it's great. On that note, and I know a lot of people, there's been lots of conversations. Do you have any thoughts? In your book, you talk then and now, of how people are working. I'm curious your thought on 12 months from today. In this strange world, what do you envision how people are working?
So, as someone who's spent a lot of time trying to figure out the future, the first thing I say is you have to be humble because you'll often be wrong. Okay, with that being said, that doesn't prevent me from trying to be wrong, so I'll try. So I would say there are 3 or 4 factors that we are now seeing. The first and most important factor when it comes down to work is people are going to ask, until 2019, you had to explain why you were not at the office, right? And you'd say, I'm on vacation, I'm at a client meeting, I'm waiting for the cable guy. From now on, you're going to have to explain, why do you need to be at the office? Just think of that as a mental change, right? And there are only 3 reasons you need to be at the office. Number 1, infrastructure, which basically means if you have to be a dentist, you can't be a dentist at home, right? So you have to be at the office. If you're working in design at Apple, trying to create the new in hardware, you got to have the machines and the lids and everything else. So there are places where you have to basically have physical infrastructure. That's one reason you have to be at the office. The second reason you have to be at the office is for a client meeting. And the third reason you have to be in an office is for collaboration and training. Because certain things like ideas and culture only happens when you collaborate and train. Now explain to me why that requires you to be in the office 5 days a week. It doesn't. So the 5-day-a-week office is done. It's gone. And not for everybody. Obviously, some traders require equipment and they have to be in places. Telemarketers, because of security and privacy, have to be. But for most white-collar workers, I would anticipate that there'll be a hybrid world. That's number 1. Number 2, therefore I've said be good at Zoom, because you will have Zoom in your future, however much you hate it, or Teams for a long, long time. The second is what you'll also find very significantly different is your ability as a boss to use power of threats, control, and a whole bunch of other stuff like hangers on and things. That power is disappearing really fast. So here's a big thing I've discovered, because I probably talk to more C-level executives now than I've ever done in my life, even when I was working. And part of it is the 2 reasons. One is I'm not selling anything anymore, excepting a $12 book, which is not this. If screw that, I'll buy 1,000. Don't worry. Now let's keep going, right? So they trust me, but more importantly, it's because there are no gatekeepers. There are no gatekeepers. There are no assistants and secretaries and people running around. And therefore, all the flotilla, if you think about somebody, when you think they had these big offices, corner offices, you went into meetings, you had meetings before meetings, gone. All these senior people are saying, I don't know why I got all these people hanging around me, right? And so what happens is there's going to be a direct relationship, which is a very, very important. So, which basically means all of us, not me, but all of you all have become very successful because you all are very good, right? And sometimes along with that, you've got a whole bunch of halo and boss-like thing. Dial that down. It doesn't matter that much anymore. Okay, that's a second, because people already, there was a cultural thing that didn't matter, but now that doesn't matter because you're at home and I'm at home. So what are you going to talk about now, right? So it's pretty simple. The third, which is I think the single biggest and broadest thing, is education. That we have to spend an hour every day trying to learn new things. And what you're going to basically see is a massive increase in people trying to recognize that there was so much that we were learning by osmosis, especially for younger and middle market people, when they were going to work, when they were interacting with people. But now we have one screen. To learn, we used to have 3 screens in the world. So one screen was the screen we currently use. Another screen were the people we would meet. And the third screen was the experiences that we would have. The experiences that we have and the people that we meet in person have really dialed down, right? And they will dial up, but they won't dial up all the way to what they used to be. And so this will be often a way that we need to go through. So how do we make up for the learning that we did not have? And these are major cultural and second order effects for business.
It's interesting you bring it, that's almost the business we're in, right? I call us an advisory firm, but we're really in the education business. I bring people together, we get them to collaborate. And it is funny, and during these times, what you see is a chokehold on expenses, right? Cut, cut, cut. Education, professional development goes first in many of these companies. And yet what we're saying is employees are number one.
Yes.
Right? And we need to, with such rapid change, we need to keep these elements of education open and breadth and being able to converse and discuss. It's not intuitive. It's intuitive when you speak to it, but you watch a lot of organizations run with it and they don't run with it. And we don't know where they'll end up either.
Yeah, they don't. And, I know we're about to go into questions. So just to let you know, in the Zoom group chat, I've basically posted 3 key things. One is the Great Reinvention piece that you had, right? So people can read if they want the whole Great Reinvention piece. And the Great Reinvention piece, which is the first part in the chat, is what at least 9 boardrooms of Fortune 500 companies are working with. So literally, it's what is happening to society and what companies need to do. And it's one. The second one is my newsletter, which is where I create new stuff. And to give you an idea of what kind of stuff is in the newsletter, is if you look at the next link, which is called 6 Thoughts for the Next 6 Months, which is what should everybody do for the next 6 months. So I'll just give you, and the newsletter is free. So, but if you decide I don't want to sign up at all, you can look at that and see if it's worth signing up.
No, it's worth signing up. And
right.
You got another one, six changes in your career, 6 career changes.
Yeah, so that I've got 6 ways to manage your career, which is also very popular. So 6 ways to grow your career, which I'll also post here. So y'all can basically see, and these are easy to share with teams. These are easy to share with anybody, and they'll just give you sort of an idea of more details about some of the things that I have been writing about and speaking about. So that's the second Spark one that I've led it.
That's awesome. And by the way, the career one isn't depending on where you are in your career. I found that incredibly insightful around actually growing the organization, not just your career, working on your career in alignment with how you grow your business. That's really what it was, because it was getting you to think outside of the box of how most of us think around our career. Before we head into the Q&A portion of this webcast, first, a brief note about PO leadership from one of our members.
I was made president just before COVID-19 lockdown began.
Nelson Fresco, President, Mila Canada.
We pivoted by compressing our 5-year online strategy into the last 5 weeks.
Surprised? Don't be. Nelson is a member of PEO Leadership, Canada's premier peer-to-peer advisory firm.
PEO Leadership helped me develop my ability to lead with speed. We've seen a substantial increase in online sales, and Mila offices worldwide are following our Canadian example.
The time to step up and lead is now. Go to peo-leadership.com.
I'm going to go to some questions. Jeff, and please put your questions. We've got Rishad here for maybe another 20 minutes. So Jeff, come on off mute and welcome.
Thank you, Jan. So my name is Jeff Chorlton. I run a business called FlexServe, and we become the in-house accounting and HR for small and mid-sized businesses. And my question to you, Rishad, is, we're seeing, for instance, in California, some of the largest corporations are essentially saying to their staff, don't come back at least until sometime next year. You're not coming back to the office, and it might be a lot longer than that. And they're also encouraging their staff to actually move away from California to reduce expense. And so my question to you is with this dynamic and the fact that people won't need to be coming to the office, do you see a lot of jobs disappearing from first world countries and going to developing countries?
Very possible. So there was a Financial Times article about somebody who's been working from home. And what they basically did is they hired someone to do their job in India. And they basically paid that person 30% of their salary. So they just handed the work to them, they did it, and then they passed it on back to the company. And the company, they were on vacation and they had the person doing the stuff in India. Microsoft today announced that if you wanted to work permanently from home from now on, you can. I'm sure it's not for everybody, but they basically said you can. There's without a doubt the reason that Facebook and others are basically making this happen is they're looking at ways to reduce their cost structure. It is one of the reasons why I have strongly suggested, and in the 6 career lessons, or the 6 things to do in the next 6 months, and one of those 2 is, despite all of your lofty positions, which I used to have once upon a time before I became like this, like an author, right? But because of that, you must think of yourself now as a company of one. I believe over the next 5 years, we'll all be companies of one. And think about both consulting models, where if you think about consulting companies, they have people with skill sets that gather together on projects. Think about studios, movie studios. Most people aren't at movie studios. They get together on the project, they get the project done, and off they go. And then you're known for certain things that you do. You're a great, director, a great makeup artist, etc. So we're moving into a distributed world, which we then reconnect. So if you think about it, it's very much like online media. Online media, there is no mass media. It's not like there are 1 million people sitting on Google's homepage. People are typing in one at a time and then you re-aggregate them. So the modern world, in a distributed cloud-based world, it's going to be that. And when people basically talk about where will the next Silicon Valley be, or where will the next Bangalore be, or the next Athens be, I'll tell you where it is. It's in the cloud. Literally, I'm having more interactions with more people around the world now than I've ever done. And by the way, I used to fly 140 flights a year, right? So this old mindset that there has to be a Silicon Valley, okay, if people have to interact, we can now interact. And when you start seeing what AR and VR and voice are bringing, it's going to be particularly, so that's going to be a huge issue. The biggest issue really today for the Western world is not immigration, it's technology for job loss.
That's great. Thank you, Rishad. Warren, can I get you to come off your mute? And
sure. Hi there.
Hi, Warren.
How you doing? So I was interested in your comment about the lobbying, and in the old days of the rise of the railroads, there was some regulations put in place, right? It was about how you manage carriers, and that carriers couldn't compete with the people who were using the carrier to distribute their own products and services. Is that a model, as opposed to just saying split up the big companies? Is that a regulatory model that you think could work in this context?
It's definitely something that could work. So 2 days ago, the United States Congress put together a 466-page diatribe against these companies. I haven't read all 466 pages, but one of them was particular rules that, for instance, they could not give preference to themselves versus other people. Exactly to your point. That is definitely one thing. So for instance, right now, it's very hard for Spotify to compete with Apple because Spotify's cost of doing business is 30% higher because they have to pay 30% of their revenue to Apple. And Apple has a competitive product called Apple Music. And so what is beginning to basically happen is the same thing for Google. Google owns one of the biggest online travel agencies. So they definitely are going to basically do that. But I think at some stage that we should really think about breaking up stuff, because I'll tell you why. Breaking up stuff will be good for everyone. it'll be good for shareholders of these companies because broken up, and Amazon Web Services is more interesting than Amazon, right? That's number one. Number two is breaking up will be better for competition and innovation. There's almost no innovation happening in many of these areas because nobody is willing to invest in anything that goes against these. And it'll also be very good for marketers and businesses because we will now have options versus monopolies. You know, when people talk about duopoly, like Facebook, Google, and media being a duopoly, no, they're two monopolies. One monopolizes search and one monopolizes social. Money doesn't move from one to the other. I understand exactly how money is flowing. I've seen it for many years, right? And so what is beginning to happen, the big thing that has happened very different is 8-9 months ago, Mark Zuckerberg had to explain, right, that how he made money, that he sold ads. This current 466-page thing basically says that Congress has figured out what's going on. And increasingly business is figuring out what's going on. And which is why the key thing I would always suggest to you all is clearly this is a big thing, which is the government, area. And the most amazing thing is the best competitor to Amazon is a Canadian company, Shopify.
Very true. It is. It's great. Thank you, Warren, for that question. So again, we got questions going on the group chat.
Yep.
I could get selective and just pick one of these guys here. I sit on one of the boards here. And Les, are you there? You always have questions and you're living this dream with Umbra these days. You'd have to come off mute though. Oh, he's on mute.
I'm on mute. I'm unmuted now?
You are.
Yes.
Yeah, I've definitely, we are in this dilemma and where Amazon, e-com has taken over. We traditionally sell housewares we built our business through retailers. And it has been disrupted the past few years, and it's obviously been accelerated by the pandemic, so that it's happened a lot faster, and Amazon is obviously dominating it. So that's a concern for us. We're trying to get hold of, like you said, own the consumer by doing everything we can to develop relationships directly. But nobody, including their closest competitor, Walmart, who has huge resources, has been able to close that gap. So it's pretty difficult for individual companies to own the consumer when people like Walmart are having trouble doing it, and Target and all the rest. And even so, our only hope is maybe government intervention, I think. And being very creative about creating some niche where we have some direct relationship, which with whatever resources we have. So that's what we're doing. But it's a little scary. It's right now, obviously, it's working for us.
Yep. Good. And what I would basically say is all of you all should recognize that this is a 3 to 5 year, and it's impossible to solve it a 3 to 6 month period. It's a 3 to 5 year period. And a combination of government, a combination of partnering with their partners. The other thing that is interesting is, since I am aware of what's going on with people like Walmart and Target and others, it's pretty amazing what they're about to start doing. So I'll give you sort of an idea. Walmart is withdrawing from almost every retail store internationally. So they're planning to sell Asda, which they bought in the UK. Because now they're beginning to recognize with technology, they're pretty much everywhere. So with the big exception of Flipkart, which they've got in India because India's retail market, you're going to see them do all kinds of pretty amazing things over the next few years. And more companies are going to do that. And they're going to be going to every person and saying, we can be a resource. And, if you remember 5-10 years ago, Walmart was considered to be a horrible person because they would destroy Main Street and a whole bunch of other things. Now they could potentially be a savior. So that's one. The other one, and I'm going to give you like a 2-minute, very quick thing about how I try to convince boards on how to think differently. And it's completely different, but I'm saying, look, you all have got a whole bunch of resources boards, right? If you actually think about how much money and people and resources you'll have, it's pretty remarkable. But what you're constantly doing is considering the current business model and moving it forward. please start with this basic belief, which is if you were to start the business today, what would you do? If you had all the assets that you had and none of the liabilities, and the only rules were whatever you do has to be legal, technologically possible, and has to make money in 3 years or less, what would you do? Do that. You know, and in effect, versus basically saying, I'm going to keep trying this thing and trying this thing and trying this thing. Andy Grove said only the paranoid will survive, which I thought is completely wrong in a connected world. It's the reason why Intel is a shell of itself. I only believe only the schizophrenic will thrive. So I tell every board, run 2 business models. One, optimized. Consider your current business, all of it, to be a cash cow. Never will become a rising star. Now create a new business, right? For tomorrow's world, utilizing everything you currently have while you're trying to keep your shareholders happy with your cash cow, which is one way of thinking about it. And then an example I give, which is completely different, as I said, is I said, let me tell you the inventions that I've done over the last 3 months in one part of my business, which is being an author, okay, which is just one part of my business, and a speaker. I completely changed post-COVID-19 how I did this, completely. And my business is thriving after I basically saw what was happening and I said, oh shit, now I know what's going to happen. So think about this. As an author and speaker, you sell books, but most of the time with the books you sold were either Audible books or you sold books that were hard copy. And you went to an event and somebody bought 100 books or 200 books, which they then put on everybody's chair. You know, you're like used to it. Okay. Well, there's no events. There's no 200 people at a particular place. If a person calls you to speak to 200 people, there's no way to get 200 books to those 200 people in different places. That's the sort of number one. Big challenge, big issue, if that makes sense, right? Yeah. So that was, I said, okay. Second is there are going to be no events. So, you know, you're not going to have events. You're not going to get speakers fees. There are going to be no events. So my whole stuff is there's no events and there's no hard books. What do I do? That's how I started. What do I do? Okay. And so I said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to basically take my stuff in my book and convert it into trading. And I'm going to focus on HR departments and CEOs. And I'm going to say, how are you going to upgrade your people's thinking? How are you going to help them feel about growth? So this is no longer about speaking. It's about teaching on the 4 areas that people are grappling with. And so that was a part. The second was I partnered with my publisher and now I have my book in the cloud. Right? And I have my book in the cloud available in every country excepting Iran. So when somebody basically like, anybody calls me and says, hey, I've got a speaking engagement, I said, would you like books? They said, fine. So I said, I'll send you a link. This link is good for 100 books, or I can send you 100 customized links, right? And the book can be read on any platform, on any device, anywhere in the world. And the price is half of what a normal book costs. So it's like someone in Singapore just bought 1,000, you know, $6. So they basically said, we're using it as lead generation. So I changed the physical model. And then I said, okay, how do I market? Because I began to realize that I can't talk about stuff on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter, because even though I may have many followers, my particular post is only seen by 1/50th of them. So that's why I launched my newsletter 8 weeks ago, right? So I said, I'm going to give away something for free because I'm going to have a direct relationship with people who care to listen to me. And in 8 weeks, I've built 2,700 subscribers. Now, of course, it's free, but 2,700 subscribers. So now I have a direct relationship with 2,700 people. I have something that's completely available in the cloud. I've basically taken a program and turned it into training for HR, and the business is booming. But I completely rethought everything. I wasn't saying the thing, and I'm in these speakers things, and I'm on these authors things, and they're all saying it's coming back. I said, you guys are idiots, and gals are idiots. You have no idea what is happening. You all talk about reinventing, but you don't reinvent yourself. How do I believe you then? And that's when the board gets up and they said, if you clown can do it, then we can do it too. I said, yeah.
That's good. Thanks, Rishad, on that. Now the questions come. When we have 4 minutes left, everybody's putting questions.
Not to worry. I know people may have to go, but I don't have to go anywhere. So,
okay. Jamie, are you still on? Come off. You got a good question for Rishad.
Yeah, I was just saying that, you know, it might be outside this group right now, but what has been the most surprising question that has come up that you've answered in the past 3 months? You thought, now that was an amazing question. Or what is there something you'd like to share about that?
The most amazing question that has come up about how to deal with people in a way that you can criticize them and you can build their skill sets while being sensitive to their backgrounds. What do I mean? Okay. So in the United States, you have the Black Lives Matter movement, you have the Me Too movement. And the downside of the Black Lives Matter and Me Too movement, both of which I completely believe in and completely support, right, is that a lot of senior management in companies no longer actually provides very good feedback to people of color or women, because they are scared that what they say might be seen as racially insensitive or ethnically insensitive or anything of the sort. And what is starting to happen is, without feedback, people don't improve. Without negative feedback, people don't improve. But the big question is, how do we build our people while being on the right side of what HR says we can say or not say? And as a result, the feedback being given to people has dropped significantly. And the reason I know this is I get this all the time from people who want more feedback, which are the people of color, the women, etc. And for those of you who at some stage decide to buy my book, you don't have to, but there's a section on feedback I received early in my career on how I had to dial down my Indianness to succeed in the advertising business, right? And my boss basically showed me how I could do that and how they would help me. And I believe to this day that made a significant difference in my career. And so my thing to people, I keep telling them, is when someone criticizes you, don't think that they're criticizing your color, your ethnicity, your sexual preference. They may actually be simply saying you're not very good at what you do and how they can improve. So listen to him. There are obviously some criticism and some things that are absolutely wrong. So if there's any kind of harassment, send them to jail or get them fired. But not every criticism is one. And so the big issue really is, in a world where people have to learn, and now people are highly distributed, how do you tell people stuff they don't want to hear without you running into trouble? That's the key thing that I'm hearing across senior levels, middle levels, etc. And it's got nothing necessarily to do with business, but it's got everything to do with business.
Yeah, and then sometimes I think we are at a higher risk of fear of losing a key employee now because recruiting training is harder than it used to be.
Yeah. It's extremely difficult. And so the big issues that everyone is grappling with it's really the big issue is, how do I give feedback and how do I grow? And how do I give feedback and how do I grow my people? Obviously, we all ourselves have to grow, but how do I give feedback and how do I grow my people when A, they're distributed, B, they're under this duress that they currently have, and C, I happen to also have to be on the right side of all these movements.
Yeah, good.
To that note, Rishad, it's funny. It's a great question, Jamie. I can tell you, even within our own organization, our community, in the last 3 months, I've heard of at least 2 situations now where issues have been brought to the board level around trying to, against these leaders, which would never have been brought to the board level. And the fear of litigation is absolutely massive right now because the pendulum is swung so far. So I really do agree with you. This is going to be a problem going forth, at least over the next year.
It is a challenge, and it's one of the things I've written about, which is, diverse faces is not the same as diverse voices. Because my big concern is we'll have everybody of diversity, but no one will actually speak. Because in effect, the way companies and ideas happen is when people sometimes disagree and are in conflict and exchange ideas. But that is the biggest thing about innovation that we may have to be concerned about as we go into the future. And it doesn't matter, even if all of us were, if I was dealing with 25, older Indian men, we'd still have that issue if we were very sensitive about how we wanted to talk to each other. So it's got nothing to do with anything else. But hopefully, you know, this was helpful. For those of you, you know, who are interested, you can everything I've given you is free, so there's no cost to anything. And if you want to buy my book, it's available on Amazon Canada. And if not, that's perfectly fine. You'll get free stuff every week.
For those, thank you, Rishad. For those, I know there's some continued questions coming up. I do tend to like to close it off at noon just because a promise in terms of how long we were going to meet. When you sign up for the newsletter, I know people can reach out to you directly and they can take their questions to you. I know you're up at 4:30 in the morning learning every morning. That's what you're doing.
Yes, and I'm at Rishad on Twitter. My email is very simple. It's rishad@gmail.com.
So absolutely. And we will send out again to everyone the links around the newsletter. And really, if you do have a chance to pick up his book, Rishad's book, I know he's not telling you have to pick up his, it truly is an excellent book. Like, you really put out there thoughts, and I found tactically, like, things that you can actually execute, which was really important.
Yes, so The Economist reviewed it in July. They reviewed 5 books, including, you know, Bob Iger's book, Larry Ellison's book, Mark Benioff's book. And they basically said, if there's one book you want to get, it's this one. And this was The Economist of London, both in the print issue and the others. Because it's actually about what you can do versus, it's not about me and it's not about some theoretical world. It's the stuff we all face.
And you can get it next day by Amazon Prime. There you go.
Exactly.
Rishad,
thank you for everyone's time.
Thank you so much for a great session this morning. If you're interested in our Way Forward Live Webcast, please visit us at poleadership.com. You'll find a number of recorded past webcasts, including Professor Janice Stein, Rosabeth Cantor, Professor Michael Beer, Joe Jackman, Harry Kramer, and Greg Wells was a couple of weeks ago. All excellent. We've got coming up later this month on October 30th at 11 a.m. Rob Chestnut, used to be General Counsel of Airbnb and author of Intentional Integrity, will join us. For those that watch the markets, Airbnb potentially may be going public, so it may be an interesting conversation as well. And then in November, our long-awaited, yes, virtual 2020 annual North American Leadership Conference. And Rishad, you're not going to like my words here. Thriving in a brave new world. I may have to change it to a strange new world, but we're really...
Brave is good too.
Brave's okay.
Absolutely.
But, you know, in linking with what Rishad's talking about, you have a chance to participate with over 1,500 C-level executives. Yes, it's virtual. But it actually, I think it'll be possible. We're playing around with technology, trying to get you guys to connect. Plus, you'll be sitting beside and talking to some of the top thought leaders. We're going to be joined by Simon Sinek, Seth Godin, Ambassador Susan Rice, which we'll have to wait to the U.S. election to see what Susan takes as her next role, and Dr. Robin Hanley-Defoe. Again, you can find more information on our website at poleadership.com. Wishing you all a fantastic rest of the day and a happy Thanksgiving to all those Canadians. That concludes our session today.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks again, Rishad.
Thank you.